Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We are joined today by Ben Carnell, Head of Client Solutions at Sentis, who's going to take us through today's session on moving from philosophy to practice, closing the gap in safety culture. As we welcome attendees today from across our beautiful country and beyond, Sentis acknowledges the traditional custodians throughout Australia and recognises their connections to land, waters, and community. We acknowledge the traditional owners of land on which we meet today and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. We extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here with us today, and we do this because we value Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander history, culture, and knowledge. Before we kick off, this session is being recorded and you will receive an email with a link to the recording so that you can revisit the conversation or share it with your colleagues. So don't need to go crazy taking notes. While we do have everyone on mute, please share your questions, reflections, and ideas in our live chat, which you can open from the bottom of your meeting window. All of your questions will be answered during a Q&A period at the end of the session. And with that, I'll pass over to Ben to guide you through today's session. Over to you, Ben.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much, Jazz, and good to see everyone on the webinar today. I can see some familiar names and some new names, and hello to you, Michael, for kicking off the chat as well. For those that don't know me, Ben Carnell, Head of Client Solutions here at Sentis. Psychologist by background, done a range of different roles with Sentis, but primarily my current role at Sentis is supporting and overseeing the consulting part of our business from first hello through to hopefully a long-term and valuable partnership for your organisations as well. I'm looking forward to today's topic because I think it's a top that I have with clients and people within those organisations. And I think it's a big challenge for organisations to take an idea or a principle or a philosophy or a theory and actually to put that into practice in the organisation. It sounds easier on paper, but certainly a lot more challenging than that. One thing I'll share with you is I just got a golden retriever puppy. Myself and my wife Charlotte, we'd sort of been thinking about getting a dog for a little while and sort of umming and ahhing and came across the opportunity to actually get a golden retriever puppy. And so we discussed at length, ummed and ahed, and did a little bit of research and decided to go ahead with it. And so now we have in our household at the moment is about a 16-week-old field golden as well. So lovely and energetic, wonderful, happy all the time, and just bouncing around with energy always. It seems certainly not necessarily at the ideal time. So I'm hoping we don't hear it during the webinar. But one of thanks, Rochelle. So one of the interesting things about that is we did a lot of research, watched a lot of YouTube videos. You know, the Instagram algorithm was full of golden retriever puppy videos and how to train and the principles that you should think about in training a golden retriever puppy and certainly early on in those first few months so that you've got a well-trained puppy or well-trained dog for years to come. It's been an interesting exercise. It's been a very interesting exercise of taking some of those principles, and watching some of those YouTube videos where it seems to make so much sense. Even we're going through puppy school at the moment. Last session tomorrow on Saturday, and that the trainer makes it look so easy. Just follow these principles, and it looks so easy. What's interesting and what's fascinating is that doesn't seem to play out exactly how it looks on those videos or exactly in those sessions at all. And I share that story somewhat going, I felt like we were going pretty good with toilet training. I felt like we were going pretty good. And I was out there just ironing the shirt just an hour ago, and there Maggie makes her comfortable place on the floorboards there, and toilet training goes out the window. And it really got me thinking, like, I wonder if sometimes this is a little bit how we feel with some of our journeys within our organizations. Is that, we can have the principles, it makes sense all on paper, but once we actually start to put that into practice, sometimes it goes well, sometimes it goes out the window, sometimes we just can't work out why is this not working. Now, I would go so far as to say is culture change and embedding the right approach to safety is far more challenging in some way. that challenge of taking principles, theories, philosophies about how to do it and actually getting that to work in practice consistently is a real challenge that we see with a lot of organizations as well. So a little bit about Sentis, just for those not familiar with us. There's a few things that are important to us as an organisation. We've been around now for about 23 years. For us as an organisation, we work a lot with organisations in helping them to be a great place to work. So it's also important to us. And so here we are celebrating our 20th anniversary a few years ago. We've been awarded a few times over the last few years, one of the great places to work in Australia for our category, which is something we're really proud of and hope that we can learn from and also apply to the organisations that we work with as well. The second thing is to support great work, and so a lot of our profits go towards actually supporting and rehabilitating and purchasing land adjacent to the Yirigi National Park, for those familiar with Yamba, down in New South Wales there, and you can see a photo there of that work with Tony, our owner, in the front there. Wonderful, wonderful, just beautiful area of Australia, and so we're really proud of the work we've been able to contribute. Likewise, our clients have been able to contribute to growing and supporting what that area looks like as well. And then lastly is to do great work. And you'll see on the next slide here just some of the organisations that we've had the wonderful opportunity to work with. A lot of work across mining, utilities, and ag, but we're seeing more and more organisations, from healthcare through to transport, through to ports, through to manufacturing. We're seeing lots of different organisations that we've had the wonderful privilege to support, even just a slither on their journey as well. With these organisations, one of the fortunate positions that we're in is we get to support a lot of these organisations, but we also get to learn from a lot of these organisations. And one of the fantastic thing about a lot of these organisations, and there's a few names jumping out in my head here, is how probably the best way to describe it is they're not wedded to a particular approach. They really look at what's the best fit for their organisation and how do they, partner with an organisation like Sentis to help them on that journey as well. So within that, we see the range of the organisations that are doing it well, and we'll touch on this in a moment, as well as the organisations that aren't doing it as well necessarily. But one of the things as I was preparing for this webinar is one of the things I had, and they're not page, but one of the organisations I was talking to recently, and I won't mention which theory, but they're saying, look, we prescribe to the principles of this safety theory. And go, yep, no worries. We can work with that. It's aligned, but slightly different to what our theory might look like. But once we started to unpack that, I said, well, what does that actually look like? And they said, these principles are really important. And and this is over months and sort of lots of conversations, as I tried to sort of draw out, what does that actually look like? What is it within your organization that you're doing or working towards that is aligned to those particular principles of that theory? And still to this moment, I'm not quite clear on what that looks like, but it really got me thinking around this challenge of what does it look like to take the principles of different safety theories and put that into practice over the years. And there's just some listed here. Some of these are still alive. Some of these are well and truly dead and gone and outdated. Some organizations are sort of, prescribing to a combination of these theories as well. There's lots more that we could unpack, which we won't get into for the purpose of today. Is what we really want to look at. Well, how do we take these principles, whatever they might be, and the goal of today's webinar is not to say, look, you should do this or you shouldn't do this in terms of these series, but to really look at what does that process look like to actually put that into practice? What does it look like to take the YouTube video, if I use that example of training our golden, and actually get that into practice where toilet training actually works? Similar with organizational safety cultures here is what does it look like to take the different principles that we resonate with in our different organizations, and how do we put those into practice? Some of these theories, and I can see some comments there, is some of these theories you'll be using, or philosophies rather, you'll be using within your organizations. There'll be principles that we see resonating quite a lot. I look at HRO as an example. We see that in a lot of organizations in terms of where they're on in their safety journey at the moment. Behavioral-based safety we see in some areas as well. The Swiss cheese model, it has a conversation in some organizations, positive and not positive as well. The bow ties, all of these sorts of things we see. What we're really looking at about is how do we principles and what look like to put those into practice. So some challenges that we've observed with these philosophies over the years, and I won't go through these necessarily in great length because I'm sure everyone by nature of probably jumping onto today's webinar, you're familiar with some of these challenges. So the first one is that some of these philosophies or some of these theories can certainly oversimplify what can be very complex. I'm going to keep going back to this example, but you watch the YouTube video on how to train a golden and you go, well, that seems really simple. But once you put a golden retriever in an environment with distractions, all of a sudden that simple becomes, a lot more challenging to apply. In an organizational context, that's even more so. Some of these theories, that they can apply, linear causality, which is not necessarily always the case. Important factors can be overlooked because it follows a very simple or overly simple process within that as well. Other models are very much focused just on the individual and not necessarily the environment within which that individual operates, and are focused very much on what does it look like to actually attribute cause or find the person who is to blame here as well. A lot of other models, don't fit the organization's context. Some of those models that are on the prior page there, some of those models or theories or philosophies rather, were developed for specific industries. Might that be, aviation, or it might be other, industries. And then there's an attempt to try and apply that to different industries. That might be, you might take a model that's been developed in aviation and try and apply that to the ag world, and it doesn't. It doesn't. They're different. They're different very differently. If I take those two examples, very different organizational contexts as well. Likewise, some models we see there as well and we look at sort of the stamp model, and other models and things like that, is they require specialist knowledge as well. And I've seen a few organisations pop up where they say, oh look, we're using the principles of this theory or this principle or this model here, but we need Sentis, or we need someone else to come in and support us to be able to apply that as well, which is okay, but that can be a bit restrictive as well if it requires specialist knowledge to be able to implement also. Some of the other reasons, a lot of them can focus on the failure or the negatives, and we're seeing a shift in this space, which is really, really encouraging. One of the things that's often fascinated me slash frustrated me is that a lot of safety tends to focus on the absence of something rather than the presence of something. And the challenge with that, focus on the absence of something, is it can be a little bit like trying to drive a car just looking at the rearview mirror. It's easy, you can sort of work out, but there's still a lot that can be missed within that as well. A lot of models, and we've seen this pop up quite a bit. I think this is one of probably the overarching challenges is they don't provide sufficient practical guidance. Conceptually very, very strong, but they don't provide enough guidance around what does it actually look like to implement those practices properly and to do that well as well. Certainly some of the more popular theories we see this with as well, that people are really big advocates of some of these philosophies, but once you start to unpack, well, how do you actually implement that? What does that actually look like? That's where it doesn't quite marry up in terms of the strength of that practical guidance as well. The other part is we see some theories, not all, but some theories provide a very static view of safety. And I think encouragingly, this is where we see organizations start to go, look, we used to sort of look at that theory, now we look at a bit of this, and now we look at a bit of that. And I think that reflects going, look, a theory can work, in some contexts, but safety evolves. Safety is evolving quite a lot. Even I look over just the last 10 years, it's evolved quite considerably and will continue to do so in different industries as well. So a theory or a philosophy that's can be quite a static view of safety is obviously very restrictive in that space. And then lastly, there is where it doesn't align well with the organizational culture. So the organization, their strategy, they might be headed in a particular direction, but that theory, that model doesn't align with what that's looking like as well. As you take something like safety one thinking as an example, there's going to be organizational cultures where that thinking just will not work based on, the strategy, the values, what the organization is trying to drive as well. I can see a comment there from Rochelle that, the role of leadership in driving this is we've got leaders pushing in this direction, but a theory or principles from a philosophy sort of pulling back in the other direction, the thing doesn't work. I think of an organization we're working with at the moment where very much trying to go on this journey of what does it look like to focus on the positive and enable leaders and people to be able to drive the culture forward. but I also look at, their safety interactions process, and, is very much focused on that has to find the negatives in every interaction, nothing about finding the positives. And so I look at that and go, there's an approach or a principle around how they do things, which is in disagreement with what they're actually trying to achieve as well. One of the fortunate positions that we're in is we've worked with a lot of different organisations over our 23 years, and you can see some examples of the fortunate position we've been in to grab different data from different organisations, and what that has enabled us to do is to my earlier point is learn from a lot of organisations around what works and what doesn't work. I want to be really clear here that as we go through and we talk about, our principles at Sentis and, our philosophy around how to approach safety, and likewise some of these other theories, is I'm not going to spend, today talking about what's right or what's wrong or what we should do or shouldn't do necessarily. I'm sure we can, enjoy a coffee or a drink and sort of debate those things. There's no shortage of that debate on LinkedIn. But really what I wanted to look at today is to go, well, regardless of what those principles, regardless of what that theory might look like, what does it actually look like to take those principles and put them into practice? So for us here at Sentis, in terms of that philosophy or those safety principles that we describe, is we've been on a little bit of a journey over the last, well, particularly probably the last 5 or 6 years, is to look at, well, what does the evolution of safety look like? Where is safety headed to next, in terms of not necessarily just what different theories or different principles are suggesting, but actually what are we seeing in the organisations that are doing safety culture well? Some of you may have seen this data that we put out a few years ago here, and if we jump to the next page, is what we looked at is, well, what are the organisations really finding challenging, and those that have a negative or a poor safety culture, what are they not doing well? And you can see here some consistencies with across organisations in terms of what they're doing well or what they're not doing well. But we also took a look at, and most importantly, I would say, is the organizations that do have a positive safety culture, what is it that they are doing well? What is it that has enabled them to be able to have a positive safety culture, either in a measured way, or sometimes that might be measured separate to this data anecdotally as well. And we see from organizations a very, very strong, clear North Star. So yes, they might have principles that they align to, and it might be a combination of different safety theories and principles, but they have a very clear North Star in terms of where they are headed and what they want to achieve. The second thing, and this popped up a little bit in a comment earlier on before I saw, is we see organizations with a very strong commitment to safety and to what those principles look like from the top down. If it's important to the senior leadership team or the executive team or even the board, it will cascade down and be important to teams as well. Strong within team safety communication, a strong level of discretionary effort in terms of driving that safety culture, and a strong culture of support amongst people to achieve that vision and what that looks like as well. This is just some of the research. There was years of really looking at client data, years of looking at different scientific literature, and even looking at different principles and theories that are out there and what we're seeing resonate with organizations. And where we landed on the journey that we work with organizations on is what we call positive safety. And so if we jump to the next slide, is positive safety was really looking at what does it look like to you for people to be an enabler of the safety culture, and for the safety culture to be about driving or enabling, to use that word again, the positive things that we want to see from what safety looks like. So not just the avoidance of incidents or the avoidance of harm, but what does it actually look like for safety to be a positive enabler of what we're trying to achieve as a team within our organization as well. Positive safety is not, it's focusing on those things we want to see more of. It's creating a culture of what we call citizenship. It's going beyond compliance. So a lot of conventional approaches to safety focus on that compliance element. With positive safety, the narrative that we work with organizations around is, what does it look like to go beyond compliance? What does it look like where safety isn't just about ticking the box to make sure that we avoid harm, but what does it look like in our organizations, we're actually using safety as an enabler for people to have, one, a positive experience of work, but also for us as a team to be able to achieve well what we want to achieve also within that space as well. Now, there's two parts of this that work in support of one another. Is that in a positive safety culture, is what we're looking at is how do we how do we enable people? How do we build that discretionary effort? How do we shift the thinking that exists around safety and adopt, historically what would be a cognitive behavioral approach to safety of enabling helpful attitudes around safety? But how do we as an organization set the conditions for that to happen? How do we set the conditions for that to happen? And I use the example I used before is, if we want leaders to be out there recognizing and not just focusing on the avoidance of things or the avoidance of the negative, but actually recognizing, celebrate, enabling their people to go after the things that help us to be safer. How do we as leaders, how do we as an organization set the conditions for that to happen? And the example I used before is, make sure that our safety interactions or our CCVs, whatever it might be, that they are actually set up to chase and recognize and look out for those positives as well. So positive safety is for an organization is looking at, well, what does it look like for us as an organization to set those optimal conditions where safety is seen as an enabler of good work, and for them to be able to bring people along that journey as well. Within positive safety, one of the things we look at is what does it look like in terms of how people experience safety within their workplace. And what we mean by that, and this actually came out of a conversation with a client a few years ago, is lots of different language and jargon that exists in the safety space. You go back to some of those safety theories, all the different acronyms, etc., etc. And this conversation with a client just came about from, you take big words like psychosocial out of it as an example and go, how do we as an organization understand what the experience of an individual is like when they come to work from a safety perspective? How safe do they feel? What are the thoughts that go through their heads, on a Sunday night or as they rock up to their shift or, rock up to their work? What does it look like in terms of how they experience the social dynamics at play, the psychological or the cognitive aspects of their work, and what does it look like in terms of the physical impacts that mean that they're safe or they don't feel safe as well. Some of you might have seen this model before. It's a model that we use in a lot of our engagements with clients because looking at what a positive safety experience looks like means looking at all three of these different areas. I think a lot of traditional models around safety or traditional safety is focused on the physical aspect of safety. You Google safety, you'll see a lot of yellow, a lot of red, a lot of PPE, like you see in this image here. But the physical impacts upon our work, what are the cognitive aspects or the cognitive drivers that sit within our workload or the jobs that we've got to do that can mean that it impacts upon our safety? Things that might drive fatigue, things that might drive stress, et cetera, et cetera. But also, what are the social dynamics at play? So what are the relationships like team member to leader, team member to team member, leader to leader? What are those social experiences like, and how does that make someone feel safe within their workplace as well? You can see how all three of these tie together. You can have someone that might be doing, high risk work. If they're under, cognitive demand in doing that and they don't feel, supported or they don't feel the trust with the person they're working next to, you can see how that experience of safety as they go about doing their job is more compliance. It's certainly not that positive enabling experience for that person to actually feel safe beyond the compliance aspects of what they're doing as well. So some of the principles, look, I won't spend too much time on this, but some of the principles that we landed on in terms of an organization that wants to try and achieve positive safety. Here are the 8 areas that we've found organizations have had the most success in terms of achieving what positive safety looks like. So the first one is lead with a vision. Those organizations that are achieving a positive safety culture, they're working towards positive safety, is they've got a very clear North Star that everything they do in the safety space anchors to. There's a clear goal, there's a clear vision that they are trying to achieve, and that's communicated and well understood across the organization as well. Sometimes we can see organizations do lots of work. They can be really good at rolling things out, but there's not a clear anchor point for what are all those different things. What are they actually trying to achieve, for the organization or certainly in the safety space for that organization? The second thing is make data-based decisions. For organizations that want to achieve a positive safety culture, there is a plethora of data that sits within a lot of organizations these days, whether it be data that needs to be collected or data that already exists. How do we use that data to make informed decision of the things to do, but also critically the things not to do? I see lots of organizations that are rolling things out, and as you start to unpack that, you go, well, for what what problem is that thing that we're rolling out trying to solve? And there might be a bit of description or a bit of sort of expansion on what that problem is, but you go, well, what's telling you that that's the problem? How do we know that that's the problem that needs to be solved? And all of a sudden, there's a gap in that decision making that's happened at some point as well. I often say, and controversially, but I'll continue to say it is the organizations or the difference between the organizations that want to make a difference versus those that want to be seen to be making a difference are those that actually take time to look at the data and get an understanding of the current context before jumping into just doing something as well. Now, that doesn't necessarily always mean, surveys or diagnostics. Sometimes it's just about let's just spend time really understanding the current context before we jump into actually doing something. The third area is build a strong foundation. So some of those principles you might be looking at, or the theory or the model, or what you might be trying to drive within your organization, is how do we make sure that we have the vital things in place to support that? So much like when you're building a house, you want a strong foundation. If we're going to drive, whether it be hot, whether it be whatever model it might be, is how do we make sure we have the foundation of the things necessary to enable that within the organization? And I'll touch on that one in a moment. The fourth area is how do we make sure in whatever we're trying to achieve in the safety space that it comes across and is driven by a core value of care. Is that we're not, where it comes across that we're doing it because the legislation requires us to, or we're doing it because we've got to tick this box. People can see that. So how do we make sure in whatever we're trying to do, which might still be about ticking that box, how do we make sure in how we do it, it comes across from a place of care and where people feel that actually the organization really cares about me having a positive experience from a safety perspective within my organization. Fifth area is be curious, and you'll see some overlap with some other theories and models here. Again, to my earlier point is one is not necessarily more right than others to an extent. There'll be different aspects or different principles that resonate with different organizations. But the fifth one there is be curious. Is how do we go in with that mindset of, well, how can we learn from this? How can we evolve? In the safety space, it's never about just, look, we're nailing it, we're done, we're great, that's that stuff done, let's move on to our other stuff. It's always about continually evolving how we do things as well. The sixth one is about keep it simple. So much in the safety space it gets overcomplicated. To my earlier point there, we can overcomplicate. We can certainly oversimplify, but we can overcomplicate things a little bit too much sometimes as well. Is how do we focus on the critical things and focus on doing those critical things really well, which ties into also a strong foundation. The seventh area is probably the area that I think there is most value in is what does it look like to hunt the good stuff? What does it look like to create a culture of catching people doing the right thing versus catching people doing the wrong thing? We see that in a lot of organizational cultures is, yes, we're focused on, vision and we're focused on great leadership and we're focused on, this curious culture, but there's still this underlying, sort of element of we're trying to find all the bad stuff. Yes, but also how do we put an equal, I would say actually more of a focus on let's hunt the good stuff. Let's go out about catching what people generally have good intent in terms of how they're trying to do their role and how they're trying to do their job safely. How do we emphasize that? How do we hunt that? How do we recognize people when they're doing that as well as a way to support what we're trying to achieve? The last one is make an impact. So in terms of what we are trying to do about our daily roles or jobs is what does that look like in the broader scheme in terms of what the organization's trying to achieve or what the organization's trying to achieve within their industry or within the market that they operate as well. I see this a bit with some of the ag clients we work with where how we want to be a safe workplace, but we actually also want to impact upon the broader industry, within ag, that might not be the corporate farms, but a little bit of sort of the owner operator farms, is how do we have an impact on what safety looks like for the industry as a whole, as well. People want to be able to contribute to a greater good, so that's a great way to be able to do that. So look, that's our approach to safety. We talk about positive safety. Some of you might have read, our book on positive safety. For those that haven't, it is available on the website. But that's, I guess, the philosophy, that we work with clients, and we've found a lot of success in working with clients on as well, and the principles that underpin positive safety. regardless of whether you're on a journey to achieve positive safety or whether you're on a journey, aligned to other principles and a different philosophy. One of the challenges that a lot of organizations face is how do you take that theory and put it into practice as well. As I was thinking about this question over the last, really over the last, sort of a couple of months, and thinking about, well, what does that actually look like? One of the models that jumped to my mind is the model of complex. When we talk about subscribing or implementing or driving or anchoring our approach to a particular safety philosophy or model, what we're in essence talking about is we're talking about implementing some sort of change. If an organization goes, hey, look, we want to focus on driving positive safety within our organization, we're talking about some aspect of change on that journey. If an organization goes, hey, look, we've been focused on safety one or safety two or safety differently for a little while now, but actually, the principles of HOP or HRO or positive, whatever it might be, are really resonating. That's the journey we want to go on, or we want to start to bring in some of these principles. What we're talking about here is change. And so I want to touch on this model here because I think it's a really, really critical model for one to understand what are the jobs to be done, or what are the things that we need to do early on, but also how do we get feedback along the way in terms of what we're doing well and where we need to pivot along the way. As you know, is implementing change or whatever that might be. One of the critical things is how do we make sure that we're pivoting along that journey as well. So as we jump to the first part of this model here. And this touches on the 6 different areas that, if you're implementing change, you're implementing a particular approach to safety. Here's sort of the 6 different areas. There's probably more, as I was thinking about this morning, but here's the 6 different areas that you really need to think about regularly as well. I touched on it before. If we're going to implement a particular way of doing safety within our organization, however it's described, how do we make sure that that vision is really clear and well understood? And they're buying to that vision across the organization as well. So often we see organizations that safety either doesn't sit as part of their vision as an organization, or there's no vision around what does good safety look like within our organization. The challenge within that is it's hard for people then to see the activities that you're doing and how that aligns to what you're actually trying to achieve. It might look like, if I think of an example here, an organization might roll out, a new approach to, how they do critical risk management. As an example, if I think of one of our clients here at the moment, the value that comes from having that vision means that, look, we're rolling this out and we're going to look at how we do this differently because we want to be an organization that achieves X. And that helps people say, okay, I get why we're doing that because it's going to help us to get to our destination. But if we haven't articulated that destination or that vision of what good looks like, people go, this seems like just another thing that we're doing, another fad or another thing, or just more stuff that's going to be on our plate. And I can't actually see the value it's having towards achieving that vision. Without that vision, that's where a lot of confusion kicks in, and that's where you start to push back or people not jumping on board with different initiatives as well. The next one is we need to have a consensus. What's interesting about this one, and this popped up in a recent client conversation where you could actually see how the safety team was approaching safety and some of the principles or values that were driving how they talk about and how they do safety within their organization was quite different to how the executive team was talking about it. And one of these organizations working with at the moment, sort of how do we get further alignment in terms of what the executive team's expectation is on what the safety team's trying to drive, but also, those principles is that way of thinking, that way of operating, and I would say is probably a bit more of a compliance approach at the moment. What does that look like for the safety team and how do they need to evolve and work with the executive team to get that consensus as well? And I think what this can sometimes look like is where the safety team goes about doing stuff or deploying different things that's at odds sometimes with what the broader organization might be trying to achieve. And that's where you tend to get either sabotage. And sometimes that can come from, within the safety team itself, as if I use that example, or it can come from operational teams as well. So making sure that we spend the time, we invest the time up front to go, hey, look, here's the journey that we're on. Will you join us on this journey as well? I had a good conversation with with someone yesterday that's looking at this positive safety journey and going, hey, look, this way of doing safety, this narrative that exists around safety or that is positive safety, we can see that having a real benefit for us. And a great call from them to go, hey, we're going to pump the brakes a little bit here because I actually want to make sure that our board is on board with this and driving this before we push go. Otherwise, we're going to get to a point where it might not be overt sabotage, but certainly it's going to be met with a resistance that feels like it's not supporting what that journey looks like as well. The next thing is we've got to make sure that people have the skills to be able to jump on board with that as well. If I'm going to go back to this example because it's very much a live example at the moment, but if we want to change, the way our let's say our safety interactions are done, we've got to make sure that people have the skills to be able to do that. If we're going to change the way um, pre-start to run, we want to actually have a different approach to safety. We need to make sure that the people leading those pre-starts have the skills to be able to do that as well. If we want to shift the way that our incident investigations are done, we need to make sure that people have the skills to do that properly. In the absence of that, and we've all been in this position over the course of our lives, if we don't feel we have the necessary skills to actually jump on board with what we're trying to drive here, that's where anxiety kicks in for a lot of people as well. And then a whole heap of stacks can follow on from that as well. The next one is around incentives. So where people feel that their contributions, either aren't recognised or aren't, supported or aren't valued, that's where you can get that resistance to change. And so what we sometimes see is sometimes what you see is an organisation where the safety team and aligned with the executive team go, look, this is the approach that we want to take to safety moving forward. We've been on a journey that's got us to point A, but to get to point B, here's the evolution in thinking that we're going to adopt around safety. But as you start to get that rolled out towards the operational teams, is you can see operational teams really buying into it, really jumping into it, but there's no acknowledgement, there's no recognition of that, of often where the hard work has been done. And so what starts to happen is people start to go, well, why am I bothering with this stuff? Now, why am I worried about what this is going to look like for us? Because I feel like we're doing all the work and it's not being recognized. I think the other part within this as well, and probably more so around the incentives, and I think there's a question there from Lillian around incentives. Incentives isn't so much about going, look, we're trying to deploy this within our organization. You've done that well. Here's a recognition or here's a reward. I think the bigger part around incentives is how do we, you might have heard myself or others at Sentis talk about the WIFM factor, is how do we articulate to people what's in it for them? What's the value of going on this journey? We're at point A and we want to get to point B. What's going to be the benefit of point B as well? The other part within that as well, also critical, and I think this relates to incentives when we talk about a safety journey, is how do we use feedback along that journey to help influence what people are doing on that journey as well. So that feedback might be positive feedback or it might be constructive feedback. But as people start to buy in and support the journey that you're on, if an organization is trying to achieve positive safety and we start to see people jump on board that journey, and try different things themselves or implement different things at an operational level, is how do we provide feedback to people so they feel that what they're doing is getting recognized. Even constructive feedback is a form of recognition. And so that feedback loop to make sure that people understand, hey, here's where we're having some wins, here's where we might need to pivot, I think is a critical part of that incentive piece as well. But a big part of that, it's not about the $50, voucher, or it's not about the barbecue necessarily. It's about how do we actually call out, recognize where people are shifting the way that they do safety within their teams or, within, their different sites as well. And I think that comes a lot back to the early part. We have a clear vision of what we're trying to achieve. If I take an ag company as an example, they might have, a dozen different farms around the place. How do we create a vision for what we're trying to achieve? Align on what we're trying to achieve across those different farms, make sure that people have the skills. And then as we give people space to start applying and doing those different things, how do we make sure that we recognize those sites that are really going after it, and making it their own, as well as providing feedback to those sites that might not be doing that as well. Without that, yeah, you'll get resistance as well. The next part is making sure people have the resources, and without the resources, you will absolutely get frustration in terms of what that journey that you're on as well. You know, if I use an example here, we might have an organization um, where they want to develop their safety culture, or they want to develop what their safety leadership looks like. And through that, they ask their leaders to go, look, we're now going to do X, Y, Z out in the field. You know, we're going to do these walks in the field. You know, in these situations, we're asking people to role model X, Y, Z. We're going to ask you to have these conversations with people here. And sometimes what you'll see is that that will be met with frustration, and sometimes quite overt frustration, because people go, how am I meant to fit that into my existing workload? So in that example, you know, if we're going to ask leaders to do more in that situation, you know, to support the journey that we're on in our safety space, what can we take off their plates just as much as well? You know, if some of the different safety theories and principles, you know, there's going to be initiatives, there's going to be things that need to be deployed or done, or certainly done differently in how work gets done. How do we make sure that they have the right resources to be able to do that? In the absence of that, that's where you will see that frustration, and often that's where that can turn into a bit of resistance as well. The final area, which is probably one of the most important areas, is around how do we have a clear action plan for what we're trying to do? How do we communicate that action plan? How do we have governance in place? You know, how do we have clear metrics that we're looking at, so that what we're doing then is we're pivoting as we deploy different things. So if an organization, think about a couple of conversations to go, okay, look, we're trying to embed the principles of HOP within our organization. Okay, well, looking at those principles is what does that plan to do so look like? And how do you make sure that you're revisiting that plan often, that you've got clear governance around clear accountabilities, but also clear metrics or targets that you're looking at, so that you can look at that data and look at, okay, what's working, what do we need to pivot on or change? But also, are those principles still relevant in terms of what we are trying to achieve within our organization as well? And so you can pivot what that looks like. Also, we see some organizations sometimes where they get really wedded to, this is the way we do safety. And I think sometimes the stack evolves because they don't actually look at, okay, is that still the thing that we need within our organization? Or do we need to pivot? Do we need to change? Do we need to change the plan as well? Without that plan, sometimes what you get, in a little bit to my earlier point, is organizations start just rolling things out, and there's not a clear plan that articulates, here's all how the different things fit together as it aligns to these principles, which are driving our objective of trying to achieve this vision as well. So without that, that's where you get the treadmill effect, where people feel like they're bought in, they can see the vision, they're getting recognized for it, but they're not actually seeing how what they're doing is ticking off the jobs to be done to be able to get us to point B as well. So articulating those jobs to be done is a really important part of what this change journey looks like as well. So look, that the Noster's model of complex change, I think, is a really relevant one for any organization that's going, look, we've got a safety methodology, or we've got different safety principles that we've prescribed to, but now actually we want to move in a different or an evolved direction. How do we make sure that we set that up for success? And I think going through that process and really thinking about, well, if we're going to move from, these principles of safety and into this direction here, is thinking about how do we make sure we have those 6 areas in place. But also, how do we gauge the response from people as we go on that journey as direct feedback around what we need more of? So if you are getting that treadmill effect where it doesn't feel like you're getting any traction there, okay, is our plan clear around what we're trying? Do we need to revisit what that plan looks like? Is that plan still the right plan? Do we need to pivot? Do we need to communicate it differently? If we feel like, that people, are feeling anxious about it and kind of, pushing back. And sometimes anxiety isn't necessarily a nervous response, but sometimes it can be a real line of questioning around what's that going to look like? How's that going to work, etc., etc. Okay, have we made sure that we're actually going to develop the people to be able to buy into that and do that thing as well? And I think there was a comment earlier on around the role of leadership. Okay, well, if we're going to ask our organization to head in this direction around safety, how do we make sure that leaders have got the skills to be able to support that as well? One of the things that we're doing a lot with organizations now, and this came out of, this evolution of Sentis and looking at what does positive safety look like, is we spent some time looking at, well, what does it look like to drive positive safety within an organization? So if an organization is wanting to, head in the positive safety space, and those 8 principles that I spoke about earlier on before, the focus on the experience of safety for our people and enabling the right conditions around that to support that. If that resonates within an organization, what's the how? How do organizations actually go about achieving that as well? So there's 4 different areas that we see work with well in terms of when we work with an organization that are important to setting that up for success. In the absence of some of these, that's where usually you see this is the change or the implementation of whatever it might be not be well into or well embedded or sustained over the long term as well. So the first part is the understand part, and the understand part is really looking at, well, how do we, and here's some of the questions or the considerations that we see from other organizations that for us highlight that these are important. This is an important phase. This phase is all about looking at what's the data telling us if we want to achieve a culture of positive safety, what's the data telling us about what's working now and what's not working. And that might be diagnostic data. It might just be conversations with different people. Might be looking at existing safety data and really getting a gauge on what story is the data telling us about how that organization currently does safety, and how can we use that data to work out what needs to be done, but also what doesn't need to be done, or doesn't need to be done right now as well. So the understand phase, we do a lot in that space with organizations, and quite a tailored approach to what's available and what needs to be gathered to be able to provide that clear picture around what's the current state of safety now. In the next phase is the align phase, and you can see how some of this aligns to what I was talking about before in terms of the Nosters model of change. There is making sure that, okay, how do we make sure that we align on what good is going to look like and the direction that we want to take? So how do we make sure we have a clear strategy in place, we have a clear plan in place, and we have a clear vision of what we are trying to achieve as well? What is it going to look like to demonstrate that journey? What are those touch points along the way that's going to tell us? What's the scoreboard we're looking at along the way that's telling us that the implementation of positive safety or any particular safety philosophy is working and hitting the mark? What does that look like in terms of how that strategy integrates with other strategies that might exist? So we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. What does it look like, in terms of really understanding the root causes of the problems that we're seeing within our organizational culture as well? The next area is around implementation, and this is an area where organizations are often very good at. But what does it look like to make sure that if we're rolling out a journey of positive safety, or we're rolling out this, or we're deploying this, that it's not just seen as the next fad? A lot of organizations, not a lot of organizations, some organizations can really be presented with this stack, where hey, we saw this and we really liked it because our neighbour, was doing it. The organisation down the road was doing it and it sounded really good, so we're going to roll it out. But we haven't actually considered, is that the right thing to roll out? How do we understand, where things are currently at? How do we get a strategy in place before doing so as well? So it's not the next fad. The more you roll out fads, the harder it is to do things in the future as well. One of the things I think at the implement phase is a lot of organisations. Is people are generally within their organizations well intended and people want to get on board the journey. And so how do we actually bring people along that journey as well, so it doesn't feel like we're doing something to people as well? So at the implement phase, what we're really looking at here is unstucking stacks like you see on this page here as well. These are certainly comments or considerations or challenges, questions that we'll hear from different organizations, is how do we make sure that what we're doing at the implement phase is going to actually work operationally? One of the questions I often get in client conversations is, what's the best way to deploy positive safety programs? And my question back is, okay, well, let's look at what's going to work operationally, because what's going to work operationally is going to be the thing that gets the engagement from people, rather than trying to fit this particular peg into a hole that might not work as well. So looking at, well, what's the thing that's going to work operationally, and let's implement in that way. Maybe it's not training. Maybe it's not, focusing on just leaders, looking at what's going to work operationally as well. The final area of consideration in driving positive safety is what we call the integrate phase. And again, you'll see some of the questions or some of the the challenges that are pumped up from organizations here. Yeah, integration is not about going, hey, we did this awesome thing, the implement phase that was driven through understanding what we needed to do, and we had a strategy and we did the thing. Integrate is not about going, how do we drive a marketing campaign or a comms campaign on the back of that? That might be part of it, but what does it actually look like to take those principles, to take that way of thinking? If we take the principle of being curious, what does it look like to integrate that as a principle in terms of how our pre-starts get done? If we, look at the principle of hunting the good stuff, what does it look like to integrate that in terms of how CCVs are done, as an example? So the integrate phase is really looking at how do we take this particular philosophy of safety and integrate it. And I use that word repeatedly and very deliberately into the things that we're already doing. Maybe it's bringing in new things, but more often than not, it's integrating into the way things get done. I think of one organization where they've rolled out, some of you might have heard about as our ZIP programs, which we used to roll out years ago. They've rolled out, a version of that program and then a different version of that program. This is over the space of sort of 10, 15 years, and even a version of, what we call our positive safety programs nowadays, where they, despite lots of prompting, what they didn't do well is actually integrate that into their daily rhythms, their daily operations. And as a result of that, had to come back and repeat the whole process again, which is not good for them. It's not good for us, and it's not good for the people involved as well. So if we're going to go on a journey of going, hey, look, this is how we do safety, and this is where we want to head. These are the principles that we want to focus on. How do we look for opportunities to integrate that way of thinking in terms of how work gets done on a daily basis? So what does this look like in practice? I'll jump through the next few slides rather succinctly. One of the big approaches of positive safety is looking at how do we enable helpful attitudes around safety that align to the vision that we want to create within that organization, but also how do we as an organization create the conditions to support those helpful attitudes as well. So all of our solutions, positive safety is all designed around this model here, the psychology of change. And what we're looking at here is whenever individuals or an organization as a whole goes through a process of change or attitudinal change, is we look at 5 different stages of change. The first stage is pre-contemplation. So we've always done it that way. Why would we change? To contemplation, to go, you know what, maybe there's a new way or there's an evolved way we can think about or do safety. To a preparation stage of going, okay, what does it look like to do that? To the action phase of going, great, now we're doing it. And then the maintenance phase is, okay, well, how do we integrate that way of thinking into how things get done? To support that, the organization needs the right motivation to change. And sometimes that motivation is, hey, we just want to be better. Other times that motivation is, hey, we've had some SIF events that we really want to shift or prevent moving forward as well. The second thing is the knowledge of change. And the third thing is an environment that supports change. So for that to happen, our positive safety journey or our solutions or what we do with organizations are underpinned by this very model here. A lot of things that organizations deploy, it might be taking a safety theory and go, hey, we're going to do that within the organization. Is it jump straight to action without actually considering what are the steps that people need to go through to actually engage and buy into that process as well. So if we jump to what that looks like on the next slide, and we can unpack that model, I can talk until the sun goes down around the value of understanding that model from an organizational and leadership perspective. But this is what it can look like once we start to get into an organization. And I grabbed this model from, and I've just adapted it slightly, but an organization we're working with at the moment. The understand phase was, they recognize, we go, look, we actually don't understand what's working or not working well. So, okay, let's design a process to understand that. Let's look at what existing data you've got. Let's spend some time on site. Let's really understand how safety gets done at the moment and use that to move into the align phase to look at, okay, what's the direction we want to take that? So using a strategy workshop as an example to really understand what are the principles that we want to drive and implement or drive within our organization. What does it look like then to bring people along that journey? What does that comms piece look like? What does it look like to get the operational leaders that will be doing a lot of the heavy lifting here? What does it look like to get them involved in that journey? And critically, what does good governance look like around that process? Implement is about how do we build consensus, but also how do we give people the skills and the resources to do what we're wanting people to do as we evolve what safety looks like within our organization. And then the integrate phase is really looking at, again, how do we take those principles that we're trying to achieve within our organization and integrate them into existing forums and rhythms that might already exist. How do we build that internal ownership so we're not relying on an external, consulting partner as a party as an example? How do we build that attention density where those principles around what good safety looks like within our organization, everyone gets, everyone understands, everyone sees, it's visible, it's heard, it's seen within how we get work done on a daily basis as well. What does it look like for new starters when they step in? How do we give them a really clear understanding? And thinking of an ad client recently, as their new starters come through, they take them on that journey to go, hey, look, here's what safety looks like for our organization. Here are the principles and values that are really important to us. And here's how we do those different things. So as people step onto that site, they understand what good looks like as well. Where we see organizations target these four areas here, and certainly this is an evolution of some of our older models that you might have seen, but that's where we start to see the maturity of that organization's safety culture improve as we jump on to the next slide there. So you see the organizations move from that negative safety culture, that strong focus on compliance, to actually move into the positive space as we jump on to the next slide, where we see that high discretionary effect, where they see that common language, and that language represents the principles that are really important to what safety looks like for our organization. There is that clear vision, there's that strong commitment around safety. There's that notion of safety being this theory or this principle or set of principles that exist, to one where actually now they are actually lived, they're demonstrated, they actually work within what we're trying to do on a day-to-day basis as well. And it's I know for myself, and I speak on behalf of others at Sentis, it's such a rewarding experience to see an organization take a theoretical concept or a principle, even something like being curious, and see that implemented in terms of how work gets done on a daily basis as well. Recognizing it's always going to be a journey. It's always about evolving those areas, but to take a principle, a philosophy, and actually put that into practice is pretty great as well. As we wrap up, folks, I'll just remind you, this is why we do what we do. This is why we talk about positive safety. This is why there's other theories and models that we like, and we might draw upon as well. But the end result is we like the outcome that we get from safety. And so organisations that really take the time to go, what are the principles that are going to resonate most for us in our context, and how do we best go through the process of taking that theory or those principles and putting them into practice? And seeing results like this is I think a fantastic experience certainly for us, but for those organisations and the people in those organisations as well. Mindful we're approaching time, folks. We'll just touch on some of our open programs that are coming up. We offer these open programs in different parts or different cities for people to get exposure to some of our content and what that positive safety approach to safety actually looks like, a little bit more than just a 1 hour webinar. Got one coming up in Melbourne and Perth if you are interested. There's some links that Shaz has put in the chat there. Brisbane's next year. But also, if there's other cities that you want us to run these in, please give us. I'll go back to my earlier point. Give us the data. Give us the data, and we can collect that and look at what other cities we get some of those open programs booked for over the coming months as well. Finally, thank you very much everyone for jumping on. I'll throw to any questions that anyone might have, but likewise happy to take any questions at a later point. You've got my contact details there as well, and we'll certainly take any guidance around taking puppy training and putting that theory into practice as well. I'll welcome that input.
So Ben, we did have one question from Rachel Cole, and it was when we were talking about the vision, and she's asked, can the vision be something as simple as, what does success look like in this area or focus? What does a good vision look like?
A good vision, there's probably a bit to unpack here. A good vision, what a good vision looks like. Firstly, it's something that everyone gets and can resonate with and everyone knows. We see a lot of organizations where and say, hey, is there a safety vision that exists? We'll go through that understand phase. Is this organization have a safety vision? Yeah, we do. Great. What is it? Oh, I'm not too sure. So, I often am reminded of the point there. The point that we're sick of talking about it is the point that people are just starting to resonate with that vision. But I do like the idea from, if I'm following the line of thinking here, Rochelle, is around what does it actually look like to get the people involved in building that vision? That might not be everyone, but what does it actually look like to actually get people to you get a bit of skin in the game built through that process as well, rather than a vision that's sometimes developed in a vacuum. So getting people to come up, hey, what does safety, what does good safety look like for us as a maintenance team today, or this year? And starting to collate those, and that team then might have their own vision that aligns to a broader vision within the organization as well.
Well, Ben, it looks like you've been so incredibly clear through this session that we don't have any other questions at this point. Just a reminder to everyone that you can contact Ben or Sentis with any questions that you have. I'd like to thank Ben for presenting today. That was a fantastic session, a lot of really useful information and tips to take some practical steps towards positive safety. And thank you to everybody who has attended today. You will get that recording coming out to you, so make sure you share that with your friends, family, and colleagues, and help them connect with positive safety as well.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a fantastic day, all.